For the last 50 years, the Center for Migration Studies of New York, CMS, has been a leading think tank and educational institute devoted to the study of international migration, to the promotion of understanding between immigrants and receiving communities, and to public policies that safeguard the dignity and rights of migrants, refugees, and newcomers.
Work of the Scalabrinian order, because it's part of their constitution, written by their founder, Bishop Scalabrini, who was the Bishop of Piacenza in Italy just at the turn of the century before and just after the turn of the last century of 1900, who came to the United States looking after the spiritual welfare of the Italian immigrants. He was a genius in many ways, I think, because he foresaw that besides the pastoral care of people, he wanted this order to have study centers on the issue of migration that would analyze it from, those days sociological terms weren't used, but really the sociology of migration, the causes of migration and how people could integrate.
Scalabrini was interested in saving the culture of the migrants. We started taking care of the Italians because it was the first group that we both were Italians. But then the congregation opened up to all immigrants and refugees. But IMR, our initiative from the very beginning, where without discrimination or anything else, we studied the issue wherever it took us.
The Center for Migration Studies was founded on Staten Island and began as a unique organization in the late 1960s. What we were interested in was the transition process. So we were much more connected to the context of the migration than to any particular ethnic group.
CMS began with the publishing of what is now the foremost social science journal on migration, the International Migration Review.
We needed to have a journal of scientific quality and with original contributions, articles, essays of various types.
We contacted a few scholars because migration wasn't a subject matter popular at the Ivy League universities. But slowly we tried to convince them to write articles on topics that were more urgent, more interesting, and more useful for developing policy dealing with migration.
That is the work that these Scalabrini priests did in putting together the CMS when nobody was thinking about migration, because the Scalabrini order is dedicated to migrants, was really extraordinarily a pioneering venture and very important to the development of a field. The combination of friendliness that the Tomasi brothers did, together with the fact that their journal was published on a regular basis, turned the IMR into the most important specialized journal, international migration in the United States, even today.
The Tomasi brothers and others at that time, 50 years ago, created this remarkable journal. And if you think about all of the academic institutions in the world, they didn't create a journal like this on international migration. These two brothers did. And it's helped to create the field of international migration studies. So that's a rare accomplishment.
As it grew, CMS began to produce rigorous and independent research, scholarship, and evidence-based policy ideas. Working with policymakers on international, regional, national, and local levels, scholars and researchers, faith-based groups, non-governmental organizations, and community-based organizations. The Center expanded its publications beyond IMR, publishing in excess of 100 books on migration-related topics, as well as occasional pastoral papers, conference proceedings such as In Defense of the Alien, and the magazines Migration World and Migration Today. CMS also hosted conferences, meetings, briefings, symposia, and dialogues.
There were a number of conferences both in the in New York and in Europe, organized by the center.
The proceedings, it was a very serious conference, and it was a must for people working with migrants to find out where the action was.
And I can remember looking forward with great anticipation to these conferences, because not only did one have the opportunity to hear the latest thinking of the administration in terms of where it was going, but also where the senators and congressmen were in terms of these policies, and what fellow practitioners were accomplishing and what their new ideas were.
We were one of the first organizations to hold conferences to collect data and to have bring together the interested parties in the question of undocumented immigration in the 1970s.
So it was a forum where all of the various players were able to coalesce their ideas to help to form a much more practical policy that had to change and become flexible as the world changed.
In addition, CMS began amassing a unique collection of archives spanning the mid-19th century to the present.
The archive has 102 processed collections, and they range from very large collections that come from agencies that assisted migrants in transit. We have the papers of the National Catholic Welfare Conference, and consequently we have one of the best collections documenting the movement of displaced persons to the United States after World War II, and the growing participation of the United States and of NGOs in the migration movement in the later part of the 20th century, now going into the 21st. We have records of practically everyone who is assisted on Ellis Island or in New York Harbor, starting from 1922. So we've got some real people, real pictures, real stories that you can put together and tell.
CMS today is led by Executive Director Donald Kerwin and a small but effective staff.
What it's done is it's kind of gotten back to basics and to the original vision for the agency, which was, you know, it was founded by the Scalabrini fathers, and that's a very, very important connection for CMS. It still is.
Under Mr. Kerwin's leadership, CMS has introduced the new peer-reviewed public policy publication, the Journal on Migration and Human Security.
The idea of JMHS was to complement and expand the strength of IMR traditionally in the organization by initiating a new publication that could bridge the academic and public policy communities, draw upon the expertise and knowledge base of immigrant communities themselves, NGOs, academics, public officials, private sector leaders, faith communities, and others, and be able to release content that is highly relevant and practical for policymakers as well as timely.
CMS also continues to host monthly seminars, dialogues, and major events with national and international partners on U.S. and global migration issues.
It has this long, close kind of set of relationships with academics in the field. And so they're very loyal and naturally gravitate to our events, and so that's terrific to see. But it also now engages closely with groups and policymakers in Washington. It has a real presence at the United Nations now. It has consultative status there, so we're able to do events with IOM and other agencies and departments at the UN and governments as well. So if you think about some of the events we've hosted on birth registration, for example, on the crisis of Central American migrant children coming to the United States, on the expansion of detention practices globally, all of these types of issues are issues that we're covering fairly extensively now.
CMS's work has always had religious touchstones.
We're trying to support faith-based groups as well, including the Catholic Church agencies, but we have a broader ecumenical approach and feel that there's a whole group of people out there that are motivated by faith and that know a lot about immigration, and we'd like to relate to them as well and are trying to do that too.
Faith-based institutions do represent religious points of view, which necessarily does entail the service of neighbor, and that's why they're involved in migration issues. What makes CMS unique is its position within the church as coming from the heart of the church, from the history of the church in the area of migration.
As an immigrant who for many years fought for equal opportunities for all youth regardless of immigration, their immigration status, I think it's wonderful the mission that this organization has. We are always willing to include not only the academic, not only the advocate or the government, but also the immigrants, their advocates, their communities. And I think that's one of the aspects of our work that makes this organization unique.
You always hope that an agency, a think tank, which seems to be very attenuated and separate from the lives of migrants, connects to them in some way, at least in some indirect way, and that ultimately would be the purpose, is to kind of improve the lives of migrants, improve the lives of sending communities and receiving communities, and that's part of the vision of CMS, is to increase understanding between immigrants and receiving communities, and to advocate for policies and research that, you know, improves the lives of all people involved in this process, all of the stakeholders, from the migrants radiating out to their sending communities, receiving communities, and nations.
Because migration issues are more relevant today than 50 years ago. The issues is global now. All countries are affected by immigration, leaving or arriving.
Immigration is here to stay. It will continue in one form or another in the United States because of the need for labor at both ends of the labor market, the need for manual labor and the need for professionals and technicians, together with refugee and other flows and unexpected events like this migration that we are seeing today of unaccompanied children into the border.
Well, I think the issue of migration will be around for the next 50 years. As the world has been globalized, so too the movement of goods and services entails the movement of people. So there's always going to be this issue among us.
The center continues to be at the cutting edge of the problems, the aspirations, and the needs of today's migrant. This is the direction the center should continue to take, and the service it should continue to provide.